Christmas had always been Margaret's favorite holiday. She loved the glow of candles in the windows, the warmth of the fireplace, and the laughter of family gathered under one roof. That year, she worked tirelessly to make everything perfect. She decorated her small living room with care, set the table with her best china, and baked the cookies that had once made her famous in her neighborhood. Golden, soft, sprinkled lightly with sugar, filled with memories of her late husband and the joy of raising her son, David. She had been looking forward to this evening for weeks. It wasn't just Christmas dinner, it was her chance to feel close to her son again. But as the door opened and her daughter-in-law, Brittany, walked in, carrying herself with the air of someone who believed the world revolved around her, Margaret sensed the atmosphere shift. Brittany's eyes landed on the tray of cookies. She tilted her head, smirked, and let out a mocking laugh that pierced the room. "Really? These again?" Brittany scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No wonder people call you the embarrassment of this family. Still clinging to your silly little baking habit." The words hit like a dagger. Margaret froze, her heart thudding in her chest. She turned instinctively toward her son, hoping for support, for some small sign that he remembered everything she had sacrificed for him. But David avoided her gaze, his lips pressing into a thin line before he sighed. "She's not wrong, Mom," he muttered quietly, almost ashamed to say it, but he said it all the same. The room felt colder than the snow falling outside. Margaret's hands shook as she placed the tray back on the table. Memories rushed through her mind, rocking David to sleep as a baby, working late nights to save for his education, pawning her jewelry so he would never have to go without. And now, in her own home, she was reduced to nothing more than a burden, a joke in front of the woman who had stolen his loyalty. She smiled faintly, though her throat burned, forcing herself not to cry. The others went on as though nothing had happened. Brittany whispered something to David, and they both chuckled under their breath. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the laughter had faded, Margaret sat alone by the dying fire. The plate of cookies remained untouched. Her heart felt heavier than it ever had before. For the first time in her life, she wondered if maybe she truly was the embarrassment they claimed her to be. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The phone rang the next morning. Margaret answered it with a weary voice, expecting perhaps a holiday greeting. Instead, she heard an excited young woman introduce herself as an editor from Forbes magazine. "Mrs. Margaret," the woman said warmly, "we came across a video of you baking those cookies. One of your neighbors filmed it, and it's gone viral online. Millions of people are watching, sharing, and commenting on your recipe. We want to feature you in our upcoming issue. Would you be open to an interview?" Margaret nearly dropped the phone. Her cookies? The very same ones Brittany had mocked? She stammered, I don't know what to say. Of course, yes, I'd be honored." For the first time in years, her heart swelled not with sadness, but with hope. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, pen in hand, thinking about everything. If people were interested in her cookies, perhaps she could turn this into something bigger. An idea began to form, something both simple and powerful, an online platform where grandmothers like her could share their recipes, their wisdom, and their stories. A place where traditions weren't laughed at, but celebrated. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, "Maybe I'm not an embarrassment after all." Little did she know, this small spark of an idea would not only change her life forever, but shake her entire family to its core. The following week was a whirlwind. Margaret had never been interviewed before, much less by a prestigious magazine like Forbes. She ironed her best blouse, brushed her hair into a neat bun, and nervously welcomed the journalist into her modest home. They asked her about her life, her struggles, and of course, the cookies. Margaret spoke humbly, never once exaggerating, simply telling the truth about how baking had always been her comfort through hardships. The photographer snapped photos of her at the oven, flour on her hands, her face glowing with quiet pride. For the first time in years, Margaret felt seen, not as a burden or an embarrassment, but as someone who still had value to give. When the issue came out, Margaret's story spread like wildfire. People were touched by her resilience, her warmth, and the sense of tradition she represented. The headline read, "The grandmother whose cookies melted the internet's heart." Her phone rang constantly with messages of support. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate her, and strangers mailed letters saying her story inspired them. But what truly ignited something inside her was a comment from a young woman online. "I wish my grandmother could share her recipes like this. These traditions shouldn't die." That one comment struck Margaret deeply. She thought about her friends, women who had also been pushed aside, their skills dismissed as outdated. She realized there were thousands of grandmothers like her, each carrying recipes, wisdom, and love that the world desperately needed but often ignored. That night, Margaret took out a notebook and scribbled down ideas. She envisioned an online community where grandmothers could upload recipes, post videos, and connect with families who longed for that touch of home. It would be called Grandma's Kitchen. Still, Margaret was no businesswoman. She wasn't even sure how to set up a website. But she wasn't ready to give up. She reached out to her neighbor Sarah, a kind young woman who worked in digital design. When Margaret explained her idea, Sarah's eyes lit up. "This is brilliant," Sarah said. "People are craving authenticity, and no one delivers it like grandmothers. I'll help you set it up." Together, they worked late into the night. Sarah designed a simple prototype, while Margaret gathered recipes from her friends at church. Word spread quickly. Grandmothers began calling, excited to join. Some had cookie recipes, others homemade jams, others pies passed down through generations. Each one carried a story. Margaret's small living room transformed into a workshop. The women sat around her table, sharing laughter, tasting each other's treats, and recording videos on Sarah's camera. What started as one woman's wounded pride blossomed into a movement. The site launched quietly, but within weeks it exploded. Families across the country signed up, eager to learn from these women. Orders for handwritten recipe cards poured in. Videos went viral, grandmothers teaching everything from apple pie crusts to Sunday pot roast. One evening, as Margaret scrolled through messages on the site, she stopped at one that brought tears to her eyes. It read, "Thank you. My grandmother passed away last year. Watching your video reminded me of her and made me feel close to her again." Margaret pressed her hand to her heart. This was more than cookies, more than recipes. This was healing. But not everyone shared her joy. When David and Brittany first heard about Grandma's Kitchen, they scoffed. At dinner one night, Brittany waved her fork dismissively. "Really, David? She thinks she's some kind of entrepreneur now? Selling cookies online? It's pathetic." David shrugged, though unease flickered in his eyes. "Maybe it's just a hobby. Let her have her fun." They didn't realize the scale of what was happening, at least not yet. Margaret, meanwhile, received another call from Forbes. They wanted to feature her again, this time focusing on her new platform. She almost fainted when they told her she would be the cover story. On the day of the photo shoot, Margaret wore a soft blue dress and a pearl necklace her husband had given her long ago. She held a plate of cookies, smiling gently at the camera. When the issue hit the stands, the headline read, "Grandma's Kitchen: How One Woman Sparked a Global Movement." The world celebrated her. Invitations for interviews, podcasts, and cooking shows flooded in. Margaret's story wasn't just about baking anymore. It was about resilience, community, and the power of tradition. For the first time in decades, Margaret felt truly alive. She had purpose. She had dignity. And she had built something that mattered. But with the light of success came the shadow of envy. David began calling more often, pretending to be supportive, though Margaret could sense the awkwardness in his voice. Brittany, on the other hand, was furious. She couldn't stand the thought of Margaret being praised while she faded into the background. "Don't get too comfortable," Brittany muttered one evening after a family dinner. "The world forgets old women quickly." Margaret met her gaze calmly, no longer shaken by such words. For she knew now that what she had created was bigger than Brittany's spite. Still, She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that a storm was coming. The months following the Forbes cover were the busiest of Margaret's life. Grandma's kitchen grew faster than anyone could have imagined. Orders doubled every week, investors called with offers, and grandmothers from across the country applied to join. What had started at her kitchen table was becoming a national sensation. Margaret was careful, though. She didn't want to lose the authenticity of her vision. She turned down large corporations who wanted to commercialize the recipes, insisting that Grandma's kitchen remain true to its roots. "This isn't just about profit," she told Sarah. "It's about preserving our traditions and giving grandmothers a voice." Sarah admired her integrity, but she also knew how dangerous the corporate world could be. "We'll need to be careful," she warned. "Big companies don't like competition, especially not from someone who's suddenly capturing the public's heart." Margaret nodded, though she didn't fully grasp the storm that was forming behind the scenes. One afternoon, as she was preparing for a meeting with potential partners, David showed up unexpectedly at her door. He hadn't visited her in months. His smile was strained, his words rehearsed. "Mom," he began, "I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. What you've done, it's impressive." Margaret raised an eyebrow. She wasn't used to hearing such praise from him, especially after months of silence. "Thank you, David," she replied cautiously. David continued, "Brittany and I were thinking maybe we could help. Bring some structure, handle the business side. You've done great, but let's be honest, you're not young anymore. You can't manage this alone forever." The words stung, though she tried not to show it. Margaret studied her son's face. For a brief moment, she saw the little boy she once cradled in her arms. But his eyes were different now, calculating, impatient. "I appreciate the offer," she said slowly, "but I already have a team. Sarah's been with me from the start. We're doing fine." David's jaw tightened. He forced a smile, kissed her cheek, and left. But as he walked away, Margaret's chest tightened with unease. She was right to worry. A month later, news broke that Peterson Industries, a massive food corporation, had launched a platform suspiciously similar to Grandma's Kitchen. They called it Family Feast, and its marketing looked eerily familiar. Margaret's heart sank as she scrolled through their glossy website. The recipes, the grandmotherly branding, even the logo, it was all a blatant imitation. Within hours, Sarah stormed into Margaret's living room, laptop in hand. "They stole everything," Sarah fumed. "Even the wording on our homepage. This isn't coincidence, it's theft." Margaret's hands trembled. But how would they even know the details? Sarah hesitated. "I don't want to say it, but someone close to you must have shared it. Look, some of these photos, these mock-ups, they were never public. Only your family had access." Margaret's heart dropped. The truth hit her like a punch. David. That evening, she confronted him. "Did you sell my idea to Peterson Industries?" she asked, her voice trembling between heartbreak and rage. David didn't even try to deny it. "Mom, you don't understand," he said sharply. "This is business. You had a cute little project, but Peterson can take it global. You should be grateful. You'll still get credit as the inspiration." "Credit?" Margaret whispered. "Do you think I did all this for credit? This was my dream. Our traditions. Our voices. You sold it for what? For money." Brittany stepped in with her usual venom. "Don't be dramatic. You should be thanking David. Without him, no one would even care about your cookies. Peterson knows how to make real money. You are just a stepping stone." Margaret staggered back, the betrayal cutting deeper than any insult ever had. She stared at her son, the boy she had raised, the boy she had sacrificed everything for, and realized he had become a stranger. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "You didn't just betray me, David. You betrayed your own family, your own roots." But David had already turned away. Brittany looped her arm through his, smirking with satisfaction as they walked out the door. That night, Margaret sat alone at her table, the shadows long and heavy around her. She felt the weight of defeat pressing down on her chest. Grandma's Kitchen was struggling against Peterson's massive advertising campaigns. Orders slowed, investors pulled out, and the media quickly shifted its attention to the shiny new competitor. Margaret's friends noticed the change in her. The laughter at her table grew quieter. Her smile, once radiant, dimmed. She no longer picked up her phone when Sarah called. She avoided the kitchen, the very place that once gave her life meaning. For the first time, she wondered if she should give up. Then came the night when her church friends stopped by unannounced. They brought baskets of food, warm hugs, and tears in their eyes. One of them, an elderly woman named Helen, took Margaret's hands and said, "You can't quit. This isn't just your dream anymore, it's ours. You gave us a voice. You can't let them take that away." Sarah, who had come along, added firmly, "Peterson might have money, but they don't have what you do, Hart. People can tell the difference. We just have to remind them." Margaret wiped her tears. For the first time since David's betrayal, she felt a spark reignite inside her. Maybe Peterson had power. Maybe they had her son on their side. But they didn't have her resilience, her truth, or the community she had built with love. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and whispered, "Then we fight." The days after Margaret's decision to fight back were not easy. Peterson Industries poured millions into their platform, Family Feast. Billboards, commercials, celebrity endorsements, it was everywhere. By comparison, Grandma's Kitchen looked small, almost invisible. Investors warned Margaret that she couldn't compete. Friends advised her to sell. Even Sarah admitted late one night, "If we don't do something bold soon, we might lose everything." But Margaret refused to surrender. She had been underestimated before, by her daughter-in-law, by her own son, by society itself, and she had risen each time. This was no different. "We're not going to beat them with money," Margaret said firmly. "We'll beat them with what they can't buy, authenticity." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we need a campaign that shows people what Grandma's Kitchen is really about." The next morning, Margaret gathered her circle of grandmothers. They sat around her worn oak table, sipping tea, listening intently as she spoke. "Peterson thinks they can steal our recipes and our voices," she said, her voice steady. "But what they don't understand is that people don't come to us just for food. They come for love, for connection, for tradition. That's something they'll never have. So we're going to remind the world who we are." The women clapped, their spirits lifted. They began recording heartfelt videos, stories of childhood dinners, family struggles, recipes that carried history in every ingredient. They laughed and cried on camera, speaking from the heart. Sarah edited the clips into a short documentary titled, "More Than Recipes: The Heart of Grandma's Kitchen." They posted it online. Within hours, it began to spread. By the end of the week, it had gone viral. People across the country shared it with captions like, "This reminds me of my grandma," and finally, something real. Suddenly, the tide began to shift. Peterson's glossy ads looked hollow compared to the raw, emotional stories from Margaret and her friends. Customers started returning. Orders picked up again. Margaret's inbox filled with messages from families who wanted to learn, not just consume. But Peterson wasn't ready to give up. Their CEO launched a smear campaign, accusing Grandma's Kitchen of being unprofessional and unsafe. They paid influencers to mock the elderly, suggesting that grandmothers didn't belong in the digital world. The cruelty was staggering, but instead of breaking Margaret, it only fueled her resolve. One evening, as Margaret scrolled through hate comments online, Sarah stormed into her living room holding her phone. "Margaret, you have to see this." She showed her a trending video. It was Brittany, standing in a spotless kitchen, wearing a Peterson-branded apron. With a fake smile plastered across her face, Brittany introduced herself as an ambassador for Family Feast. She boasted about how Peterson was the future, while subtly ridiculing Grandma's Kitchen. Margaret's chest tightened. "So that's it," she whispered. "They didn't just steal my idea. They used my own family to destroy me." For a moment, She felt the weight of despair pressing down again. But then she remembered Helen's words, "This isn't just your dream anymore, it's ours." The next morning, she gathered her grandmothers once again. "We're not fighting just for ourselves now," she told them. "We're fighting for every woman who was told she was useless, every tradition that was laughed at, every grandmother who was silenced. We are going to win, not with hate, not with money, but with truth." The women rose to their feet, their voices strong. And so the battle escalated. Peterson threw everything they had into their campaign, but Grandma's Kitchen doubled down on authenticity. They began live-streaming weekly Grandma Nights, where families could cook along in real time. Children laughed as they kneaded dough with their grandmothers, parents sent in photos of their kids proudly holding pies, and communities gathered around screens as if Margaret's living room had stretched across the nation. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, volunteers offered to help, and journalists once again turned their attention to Margaret's story. Headlines read, "Grandmothers versus Corporate Giants, the Fight for Tradition." But the most powerful moment came during an interview with Forbes, when Margaret was asked what kept her going despite the betrayal and the pressure. She looked straight into the camera and said, "Because this isn't about me anymore. This is about proving that we are never too old to matter, never too old to build, never too old to change the world." The clip spread like wildfire. Millions watched it, millions shared it, millions felt it. Peterson's stock began to drop. Investors grew nervous. Customers abandoned them for Margaret's heartfelt alternative. Even celebrities who had endorsed Family Feast began to distance themselves, praising Grandma's Kitchen instead. But amidst the growing victory, Margaret's heart ached. For all the triumphs, there was still David. One night, he came to her door, his face pale, his tone subdued. "Mom," he said softly, "I think I made a mistake." Margaret looked at him, her heart torn. She wanted to embrace him, to forgive him, but the wound was still raw. She simply replied, "You didn't just hurt me, David. You hurt yourself. And you'll have to live with that." David lowered his head in shame. For once, Brittany wasn't by his side. Margaret closed the door, her decision clear. The past couldn't be undone. The only path was forward. And forward she would go, into the final stretch of a battle she never asked for, but one she was destined to win. The war between Grandma's Kitchen and Peterson Industries reached its peak. For months, the corporate giant had tried every trick, ads, lawsuits, smear campaigns, but nothing seemed to stop Margaret and her circle of grandmothers. If anything, every attack only made them stronger. The public saw the contrast clearly, a cold corporation chasing profit versus a group of women offering love, memory, and authenticity. Peterson's glossy campaigns no longer fooled anyone. Their recipes tasted hollow, their videos staged. Meanwhile, Margaret's live streams grew into a cultural phenomenon. Families across the nation gathered in kitchens every Sunday, cooking side by side with grandmothers on screen. Children giggled as they spilled flour, fathers proudly showed off lopsided pies, and mothers wiped tears as they tasted dishes that reminded them of their own childhoods. It wasn't just cooking anymore. It was healing. Margaret knew then that she had already won. One morning, she awoke to Sarah pounding on her door, face glowing with excitement. "Margaret, turn on the news." Margaret switched on the television just in time to see the headline scroll across the screen. Peterson Industries declares bankruptcy after public backlash. Margaret sat down slowly, her heart racing. She listened as the anchor explained how Peterson's investors had pulled out, their stock had plummeted, and their so-called Family Feast platform had collapsed under the weight of scandal and boycotts. It was over. Tears streamed down Margaret's face, but they weren't just tears of relief. They were tears of triumph. For years, she had been told she was worthless, mocked by her own family, dismissed by society. And now, here she was, the grandmother who had beaten a corporate empire. Later that day, her phone rang again. It was Forbes. "Margaret," the editor said warmly, we'd like to do another cover story. This time, not about cookies, not about recipes, but about your victory. About how you proved that love and tradition can outshine corporate greed. We want to call it The Grandmother Who Defeated Corporate America. Margaret laughed softly through her tears. I never set out to defeat anyone. I only wanted to share what I loved. Exactly, the editor replied. And that's why you won. The issue hit stands a month later, and Margaret's face beamed from newsstands across the country. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her. Children pointed, whispering, "That's the cookie grandma." Her inbox flooded with letters of gratitude from families around the world. But not everyone was celebrating. David returned once more, this time without Brittany. His shoulders were slumped, his voice low. "Mom, Brittany left me. I lost everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I had to say I'm sorry." Margaret looked at him, her heart torn between love and hurt. She saw the broken man before her and the little boy he once was. Slowly, she nodded. "I can forgive you, David," she said softly, "but you must forgive yourself too. That will be the harder part." David wept, and for the first time in years, Margaret held her son close. Their relationship would never be what it once was, but it had a chance to heal. And that was enough. As for Brittany, she disappeared from their lives, consumed by her own bitterness. Margaret no longer wasted a single thought on her. With Peterson gone, Grandma's Kitchen flourished. The platform expanded nationwide, then internationally. Grandmothers from all walks of life joined, sharing recipes from Italy, Mexico, India, Nigeria, Japan. It became a global tapestry of tradition, love, and resilience. Margaret no longer worried about being too old or irrelevant. She knew now that age was her strength, not her weakness. Her wrinkles told stories. Her hands carried wisdom. Her cookies carried history. And as she stood on stage at a community event, looking out at hundreds of families gathered to celebrate Grandma's Kitchen, Margaret smiled. "This journey began because someone once called me an embarrassment," she told the crowd. "But I learned something important along the way. Revenge doesn't have to be loud or cruel. The sweetest revenge is living with purpose, proving that no one, not even the people closest to you, gets to decide your worth." The audience erupted in applause, children waving, parents cheering, grandmothers wiping tears. Margaret lifted her head, her heart full. The woman who had once been dismissed, mocked, and betrayed had not only reclaimed her dignity, she had built an empire of love. And though she never said it aloud, deep inside she knew the truth. Her daughter-in-law's cruel words, her son's betrayal, Peterson's greed, none of them had broken her. They had only pushed her toward the destiny she was always meant to fulfill. Margaret, the so-called family embarrassment, had become a legend.